Japanese vegetable growers almost never lose a plant in the 6 weeks before first harvest. I did. For years. On the same ground, with the same seeds, in the same season, and I kept finding explanations that weren't the real one. I farmed 58 acres in the Willamette Valley for 22 years, about 9 of those in intensive market production at any given time. Tomatoes, dry beans, winter squash, peppers, brassicas on rotation. I ran a CSA for 15 of those seasons, sold direct to restaurant accounts, worked markets through 4 different decades. I've had years that paid off debt and years that added to it. The failure I'm going to describe cost me 2 full consecutive growing seasons before I traced it to its actual source. I'm laying it out plainly so you don't spend the same years working backward to the same answer. The failure has a signature. I've seen it enough times I can describe it from memory without looking at a single plant. You put a transplant in the ground. The first 2 weeks, it takes hold. Stem thickens, new leaves push out. The roots are finding water. By week 4, it looks like you've done your job. You've got a plant, not a seedling anymore. And it looks healthy enough that you stop watching it as closely. Then something shifts. The lower leaves start to yellow at the margin. Not the whole leaf, just the edge, like a tide retreating. Growth slows. The plant reaches the point where it should be pushing into flower, and it stalls instead. By week 7 or 8, you're either getting poor fruit set, or the plant is declining in a way that nothing you do is going to reverse. You pull it out. The root system is thin, pale. Like it never really got a grip on anything. I blamed variety for 2 years, tried different seed sources, changed my irrigation schedule, added calcium because someone told me it was blossom end rot adjacent. One season, I pulled all my early tomato starts and replaced them with a late-season variety I'd had luck with before. Same result. The wall hit on the same schedule regardless of what I'd planted. That consistency was the diagnostic I was missing. I just wasn't reading it right. The timing of that collapse tells you everything if you know what to look for. In 2011, I was running about 4 acres of field tomatoes and 2 acres of tunnel peppers. Lost the peppers almost entirely. Good vegetative growth, decent establishment through week 5, and then a wall. Fruit set was so poor, I tilled half the planting under rather than pay harvest labor for what was there. That winter, I started reading and asking questions, reaching out to growers who'd been farming longer than I had. What I kept finding was that my beds were biologically inactive at the exact moment my plants needed them most. Here's what's actually happening. For the first few weeks after transplant, a plant is building structure, roots, stems, leaf surface area. The nutrient demand is relatively simple and mostly met by whatever fertility you put down at planting. Then the plant crosses a threshold. It shifts from building itself to reproducing. That transition triggers a completely different demand pattern. It needs phosphorus in forms that aren't loose in your soil. It needs trace minerals locked into soil particles. It needs a biological exchange network to pull those elements from the surrounding soil matrix and deliver them to the root surface in forms it can absorb. In living soil, that network is already there. In soil that's been cleared and left bare, it isn't. You've been treating this as a plant problem because that's where the symptoms appear. The yellowing, the stall, the failed fruit set, all of that is the plant reporting what the soil stopped providing. By the time you see it in the leaves, the window to correct it in that season is already closed. You're looking at a soil problem a month after it started. Here's what most growers do without understanding the consequence. You finish a crop, you clear the bed, pull the spent plants, rake it down, maybe run a broad fork. You leave it bare while you wait on your next transplants, or just take a few days between cycles. That window, even 7 to 10 days of bare soil under a summer sun, is enough to collapse the fungal layer that was beginning to establish in the top 2 inches of your ground. I'm talking about fungal threads, bacterial colonies, the surface biological community that lives in direct relationship with organic matter and moisture. Expose that layer to direct sun on bare soil, and the moisture is gone in days. The food source disappears with the plant residue. The population doesn't go dormant. It dies. I've pulled back the organic layer on beds I've managed both ways, side by side, in the same growing season. On a cleared bed that's been sitting bare for 2 weeks, the top inch is pale, dry, and clean. On a covered bed that's had continuous organic matter laid across it, that same top inch is dark, slightly moist even without recent irrigation, and laced with white fungal threads you can see with your naked eye. That difference is not cosmetic. That difference is the gap between a plant that moves through the production window and one that stalls 3 weeks before you ever see a harvest. The system you've built, without choosing to, without being taught otherwise, strips biological activity out of your beds on a predictable schedule, right before your plants need it at full capacity. I started looking seriously at Japanese intensive production methods about 12 years ago, after reading about small plot systems producing yields on a 1/4 acre that I couldn't match on 4 times the ground. The outputs were documented and real. I wanted to understand what was different at the soil level. What I found was not a fertilizer difference, not a variety difference. It was a fundamental difference in how they think about what soil is. They don't treat it as a growing medium that holds roots and accepts inputs. They treat it as a living system that requires continuous feeding to stay functional. And they run a specific routine to make sure it never drops below the threshold of biological activity that a production stage plant depends on. 3 practices form the core of it. The first is non-negotiable. The soil surface is never bare. Not between crops. Not during a transplanting gap. Not at any point in the growing cycle. When one crop comes out, something goes back in immediately. A fast ground cover, a layer of chopped plant material, a new transplant. The organisms that live in the top 2 inches of a healthy bed depend on 2 things: moisture and food. Bare soil exposed to summer sun loses both within days. These growers treat a bare bed the way I'd treat a broken tractor at the start of planting season, something that cannot wait. The second practice is a steady rhythm of small organic matter additions at the soil surface. Not a seasonal compost application, not bagged fertility dumped in at transplant time. Plant material chopped and left in place after every harvest. Old leaves stripped from producing plants and laid at the base of the stem. The residue from fast crops spread across the bed before the next planting goes in. The biology feeds on this continuously. The population stays high. The fungal networks stay dense. By the time a new transplant needs that network at the production transition, it's already running at full function. It doesn't need to rebuild from scratch on a deadline. The third practice is the one most growers never consider: continuous root presence in the bed. When a fast crop finishes, they don't leave the bed empty while they decide what's next. They transplant immediately or let a ground cover fill the gap. The reason matters more than most people realize. Living roots exude sugars and carbohydrates into the surrounding soil every single day they're alive. Those exudates are the primary food source for the fungal networks that live in close contact with root surfaces. No roots means no exudates. The network that took weeks to build contracts and days when the food supply stops. They're not adding biology at planting time. They're keeping it alive between plantings, so it's already fully functional when the plant reaches the production window and reaches for it. The specific biology worth understanding is mycorrhizal fungi. These are fungal species that grow in direct physical connection with plant roots, extending filaments out into the soil matrix far beyond where roots themselves can reach, sometimes expanding a plant's effective mineral access zone by a factor of 10 or more. In exchange for the sugars the plant feeds them through root exudates, they deliver phosphorus and trace minerals back to the root surface in forms the plant can absorb immediately. For most vegetable crops at the flowering and fruiting stage, this is not supplemental. It's the primary delivery mechanism for the minerals that drive reproductive growth. A healthy, functional network takes 3 to 5 weeks to establish after a new transplant goes in. It requires continuous organic matter and continuous root presence to reach the density where it can meet the demand of a plant moving into full production. When you clear your bed and leave it bare for 2 weeks before transplanting, the clock resets to 0. Your plant reaches the production window at week 6 or 7. The fungal network is still at week 3 of a 5-week establishment curve. The plant reaches for the mineral supply. The network can't deliver at scale. You see it in the leaves within days. In a bed managed with continuous cover, the network never resets. When the new transplant goes in, it contacts an already dense, already active system within the first week. By the time flowering triggers, the network is running at capacity. The plant moves through the production window the way it was built to. I've seen this on my own ground. Same variety, same bed dimensions, same inputs, same season. One bed managed for continuity, one managed the old way. The difference in fruit set wasn't close. This scales to whatever you're working with. The biology doesn't care about footprint. It cares about continuity. Pick one bed. When your next crop finishes, don't clear it. Cut the spent plant at the base. Leave the root system in the ground to decompose in place. Those roots will keep feeding the fungal network as they break down and will leave channels in the soil that your next transplant's roots will find immediately. Take the above-ground material, chop it, lay it across the bed surface as a mulch layer. Plant your next crop directly into that covered, biologically active bed. That's the entry point. One bed, one cycle. What you'll see over the next 6 weeks is specific. The new transplant establishes faster. You won't see the mid-cycle yellowing that signals a nutrient wall at the production transition. The flowering window arrives on schedule, and the plant pushes through it instead of stalling. At the end of that cycle, the soil is darker and more friable than it was at the start, not more depleted. From there, you add the succession habit. Never let a harvested gap sit empty for more than a few days. Fast greens, a cover crop, anything with active roots keeps the network fed between your main crops. Within one full growing season of running this routine, the beds managed this way will perform visibly differently from the ones you haven't changed. You won't need data to tell you. You'll see it. I've farmed through enough bad seasons to be well past blaming the weather or the seed catalog. When a failure repeats the same way, in the same window, across multiple years and multiple varieties, that's not bad luck. That's a system telling you something consistent. And consistent problems have consistent causes. The pre-production collapse I spent 2 seasons chasing had nothing to do with my inputs or my varieties. It had everything to do with the fact that I was handing my plants a biologically depleted soil at the highest demand period of their entire growing cycle, and then adding more fertilizer, as if that was the answer. I was clearing beds on a schedule that made sense for tidiness and made no sense at all for the living community in the top 2 inches of my ground. One bed managed differently, one full cycle. You'll see the difference before that season is over. Your soil was always trying to support the plant. You just kept clearing away the system it needed to do it.